Police officers, tell us about your funniest and most interesting tasks.
Alright, so this happened about 5 years into my career as a cop. By then, I thought I'd seen it all: drunk drivers, domestic disputes, shoplifters who thought they were criminal masterminds. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for the call I got that Tuesday afternoon. I was cruising through the usual suburban routes with my partner, Jeff. It was one of those slow days where the radio mostly crackled with traffic updates and the occasional noise complaint. We were half joking about who had the worst coffee breath when the dispatcher's voice broke in. Unit 7-2, we've got a 10-96 at the Greenway supermarket. Report of a male subject, undressed and behaving erratically in aisle 4. Jeff and I exchanged glances. A 10-96 is a code for a psychiatric issue. The undressed part. Well, that was just the cherry on top. We pulled into the supermarket parking lot, lights but no sirens, didn't want to cause a scene, though, realistically, the scene had probably already been caused. The store manager, a wiry guy with a comb-over and a name tag that said, Doug, was waiting outside, nervously wringing his hands. "Oh, thank God you're here," he breathed, leading us inside. "He's in the canned goods section. He's got the peas." "The peas?" I repeated, but Doug was already hustling ahead, weaving through displays of chips and seasonal cookie tins. When we turned the corner into aisle 4, I almost lost it. There he was, a man in nothing but his birthday suit, standing in front of a shelf of canned vegetables. He had at least 10 cans of peas cradled in his arms, his face a mask of deep concentration. "Sir." I started, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is everything all right?" He turned slowly, his eyes wide and almost childlike. "The peas," he whispered. "They're talking to me." Now, I'm a professional, but you try keeping a straight face when a naked man with a can of peas tells you they're speaking to him. Jeff had to turn away, shoulders shaking as he pretended to cough. "Okay, sir," I said, easing forward. "Why don't we, put the peas down and talk about it?" He nodded solemnly, then gently placed the cans back on the shelf, like he was putting a baby to bed. "I can hear them," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "They're planning something." At this point, we were close enough to grab him if we needed to. But he wasn't aggressive, just lost. "All right, buddy," Jeff said, stepping in. "Let's get you somewhere safe, okay?" The guy didn't resist. We wrapped him in a spare blanket from the car and got him into the back seat. He kept muttering about the peas, asking if we could warn the others. Turns out, he was off his meds. His family had been looking for him for a couple of days, worried sick. We got him the help he needed, and last I heard, he was doing a lot better. But to this day, whenever I walk past the canned goods aisle, I can't help but give the peas a little nod. Just in case, after the pea whisperer incident, Jeff and I thought our week couldn't get any weirder. Turns out, we were just getting started. It was a quiet Thursday evening, the kind where the sky hangs in that lazy orange glow before night settles in. We were parked near the edge of a cul-de-sac, keeping an eye on a known drug house. Nothing major, just making our presence known. Jeff was halfway through a tragic gas station sandwich when the radio crackled to life. Unit 7-2, respond to a disturbance at 814 Maple Drive. Caller reports, an invasion of garden gnomes? Jeff froze, a bit of lettuce dangling from his lip. Did she say garden gnomes? I nodded, trying not to laugh. Sounds like it. We rolled up to Maple Drive, expecting maybe a prank or an overly imaginative old lady. The house in question was a small, cozy bungalow with a perfectly manicured lawn. And, sure enough, the lawn was swarming with garden gnomes. I'm talking dozens of them. Short, round, and all wearing those classic red hats. Some held lanterns, others fishing rods, a few had tiny wheelbarrows. They were everywhere, on the lawn, lining the walkway, peeking out from behind bushes. An elderly woman stood on the porch, her white hair in curlers, a floral robe wrapped tightly around her. She waved us over, her face a mix of confusion and fear. "Oh, thank heavens," she said. "They just appeared." I woke up from my nap, and there they were. I bit my tongue to keep from smiling. "Ma'am, did you see anyone putting them here?" "No." She clutched her robe tighter. "I was watching my stories, then I dozed off. When I woke up, the whole yard was infested." Jeff circled the house, checking for signs of trespassing, but everything was quiet. No footprints, no tire tracks, just gnomes. "Any teenagers in the area?" I asked. "Anyone who might have pulled a prank?" She shook her head. "Not that I know of. It's usually so peaceful here. Just me and my cat, Mr. Buttons." At the sound of his name, a plump orange tabby appeared in the window, glaring at the gnomes as if they were personally responsible for ruining his evening. "All right, ma'am," Jeff said, joining us. "We'll file a report. If it's a prank, we'll do our best to find out who's behind it." She nodded, still eyeing the gnomes with suspicion. "What should I do with them?" "Honestly?" I shrugged. "Maybe keep a few. They kind of brighten up the place." She didn't laugh. "No. They're staring at me." So, Jeff and I spent the next hour loading garden gnomes into the trunk of our cruiser. We fit as many as we could, then radioed the precinct for backup. By the end of it, we had 2 patrol cars filled with gnomes, their little ceramic eyes peeking out from the back windows. Back at the station, our sergeant just stared at us. "What the hell am I supposed to do with these?" "Evidence," Jeff offered. The gnomes ended up in the break room, scattered among the old magazines and the busted coffee maker. Over time, officers started dressing them up, one got aviators, another a little badge. Someone even painted a gnome with a donut in its hand. We never did find out who put them there. But for months, every time I walked into the break room, I'd be greeted by an army of silent, ceramic stares. It became a running joke, a reminder that in this job, no matter how much you think you've seen it all, the universe always has a surprise waiting in aisle 4 or on a quiet street in Maple Drive. And, I'll admit, I ended up taking one home. He sits by my front porch now, a little gnome with a fishing rod, keeping watch. My wife hates it, but hey, a guy's gotta have his trophies, right? You'd think after the naked pea guy and the garden gnome invasion, I'd stop being surprised by my calls. But then came the chicken incident. It was a chilly morning, frost still clinging to the grass, and Jeff and I were doing our usual rounds. The radio crackled, and the dispatcher's voice cut through. "Unit 7-2, respond to a disturbance at 221, Pine Street. Caller reports possible animal abuse. Subject involved, a chicken." Jeff sighed, already rubbing his temples. What is it with this town and weird animals? We pulled up to a quaint little house with a white picket fence. A woman in her 70s stood in the yard, arms crossed over her floral apron. She had that stern grandma look, the kind that could silence a room full of rowdy kids with just one arched eyebrow. "Ma'am, did you call about a chicken?" I asked, keeping my tone professional. She pointed sharply at her neighbor's yard. "That woman is a menace." I knew she was trouble the minute she moved in. Her troublemaking neighbor turned out to be a woman in her 30s, standing on her porch looking bewildered, a large white chicken cradled in her arms. "Ma'am, can you tell me what happened?" I asked her. She gently stroked the chicken's back. "This is Muffin. She got out of her pen this morning. I was just bringing her back inside. The old lady wasn't having it. Don't believe her. She was out here, waving that poor bird around, talking about some kind of ritual. I saw it with my own eyes." I glanced at Jeff, who gave me a small shake of his head, no signs of any crime, no evidence of harm. Just a chicken and two very different stories. Ma'am, Jeff asked the old lady, did you actually see her hurting the chicken? She hesitated. Well, no. But she had a stick. She could have been planning something. The younger woman held up the stick, a simple broom. I was sweeping my porch. It took another half hour to calm them both down. We suggested maybe putting a higher fence around Muffin's pen and advised both parties to avoid each other for a bit. As we were getting back into the car, the old lady pulled me aside. Just keep an eye on her, officer. One day it's a chicken, the next, who knows? I nodded, doing my best to keep a straight face. We'll keep an eye on it, ma'am. On the drive back, Jeff started laughing so hard I thought he'd choke. A chicken ritual? Can you imagine the report on that? Subject observed conducting suspicious chicken ceremony, I joked. Feathered accomplice showed no signs of duress. By the time we got to the station, we'd spun the whole thing into a mock crime scene. We even drew a tiny chalk outline for a rubber chicken someone had in their locker. It became an inside joke. Anytime a call sounded too ridiculous, someone would mutter, better check for chickens. These days, whenever I pass by 221 Pine Street, I still look for Muffin. And every now and then, I think about how even the silliest calls can stick with you. Because sure, being a cop is serious business, but sometimes, it's the absurdity that keeps you sane. And if nothing else, I'll always have the story of the chicken ritual to tell at parties.
Alright, so let me set the stage. I'm Officer Lisa Warren, been with the department for about 7 years. I'm not the kind of cop that has wild shootouts or car chases every day. Honestly, most of my days are filled with paperwork, dealing with noise complaints, and maybe the occasional shoplifter. But every once in a while, the universe tosses me a gem. One of those gems walked right up to me at a gas station. It was a slow afternoon and I'd stopped to grab a coffee. I was in uniform, which usually keeps most people polite and a bit distant. But not this guy. He was mid-20s, looked like he just rolled out of bed, wrinkled hoodie, backwards cap, a 5 o'clock shadow trying to be a beard. He sidled up to me while I was adding creamer to my coffee. Hey there, officer. You arrest people for stealing hearts too. He flashed a grin that might have worked on drunk college girls but did nothing for me. I glanced at him over my cup. Only if they press charges. Instead of taking the hint, he leaned in closer. You know, I've always wanted to be in handcuffs. Maybe you could help me out with that. I rolled my eyes, but I wasn't in a rush. I don't think you'd enjoy it as much as you think. Oh, I'm pretty adventurous, he said, winking. At this point, the clerk, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and a no-nonsense attitude, was watching from behind the counter. She shot me a look, half amused, half sympathetic. I decided to play along. You know what? I could run a quick background check. Maybe see if you've got any outstanding warrants. He straightened up, a flicker of panic crossing his face. I was just kidding. No need for all that. I smiled sweetly. Ah, but you were so confident a second ago. He muttered something under his breath and slinked away, and I finished my coffee in peace. The clerk chuckled as I paid. He's been bugging every woman who walks in here. Thanks for that. No problem, I said. Consider it community service. But as much as I enjoy shutting down a bat pickup line, nothing beats some of the calls I've been on. One in particular still makes me laugh to this day. We got a call about a suspicious person loitering near a senior living community. Dispatch said the caller described the suspect as creeping around and acting weird. So my partner and I rolled up, expecting maybe a vagrant or a lost kid. Instead, we found a little old lady in a trench coat and sunglasses. She was crouched behind a bush, peering through binoculars. I approached slowly, trying not to startle her. Ma'am, are you all right? She whipped around, nearly falling over. Oh heavens! She yanked off the sunglasses. You scared me. What are you doing out here? She hesitated, then sighed. It's my husband, Earl. He told me he was at his poker game, but I had a feeling he was with that hussy from bingo night. I bit my lip, trying not to laugh. So you're spying on him? She nodded, holding up the binoculars. I was right too. Saw him going into Gladys's apartment 10 minutes ago. I glanced at my partner, who was leaning against the squad car, visibly enjoying this. Ma'am, do you need us to do anything? Oh no. I just needed confirmation. She stood, dusting off her coat. I've got his credit card. I'm off to the casino. With that, she marched past us, chin held high. We watched her go, a mix of confusion and admiration. On the drive back, my partner just shook his head. Man, I hope I have that kind of energy when I'm her age. I laughed. If you do, I'll make sure not to answer your wife's calls. This job isn't always glamorous, but every now and then it throws me a curveball. And I'm here for it. Working as a police officer, you get used to a certain level of chaos. But sometimes the weirdness doesn't just come from the calls, it walks right into the station. A few months back, we had this guy, probably in his early 20s, who strolled into the precinct like he owned the place. He wore neon green Crocs, cargo shorts, and a hoodie with a cartoon pickle on it. His hair was a mess, and he had this constant smirk, like he knew something no one else did. He walked up to the front desk where I was handling some paperwork. Hey, I need to report a crime, he said, not looking the least bit concerned. All right, I said, grabbing a form. What happened? He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. My neighbor's a time traveler. I paused, pen hovering over the paper. Excuse me? Yeah, he said, nodding seriously. I saw him take out the trash yesterday, and this morning the trash is back. He's resetting the timeline. Now, I've learned to keep a straight face in all kinds of situations, but this one tested me. Have you spoken to your neighbor about this? I can't, he whispered, glancing over his shoulder. He might erase me. I managed to keep it together. All right, why don't you take a seat? And I'll get someone to talk to you? He plopped down, still looking around suspiciously. I went to the back and pulled aside one of our community officers, who had the patience of a saint. They spent an hour with him, eventually figuring out that his time traveler was just a guy with a weird work schedule who took the trash out before dawn. The best part? As he was leaving, he gave me a thumbs up. Thanks for keeping the timeline safe, officer. But that wasn't the last I'd see of him. A week later, he showed up again. This time, he claimed his neighbor was a vampire because he'd only seen him at night. We had a similar chat, and I gently suggested he might want to speak to someone professionally. He agreed and even thanked me. Honestly, I kind of miss him. At least his calls broke up the monotony of noise complaints and parking disputes. But not all the calls I get are funny. Some are just plain bizarre. One morning, I was dispatched to a house on the edge of town. The caller, an older gentleman, said he needed help with a family dispute. When I got there, he met me at the door looking frazzled. Thank goodness you're here, he said, ushering me inside. The house was clean and smelled like lavender. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, until I noticed the living room. Or rather, the 10 raccoons sitting on his couch. Sir, are those? He sighed. My wife. She left me and took the dog, so I found these guys in the backyard. Apparently, he'd started feeding a couple of raccoons, and now his family had grown into a small army. They sat, perfectly behaved, watching an old western on TV. One of them even had a tiny blanket draped over it. I called because they won't leave, he said, voice wavering. I think they've moved in. It took some negotiating, mostly with animal control, but we got his roommates relocated safely. I sat with him for a bit, talked him through the breakup, and made sure he had someone to call if he needed support. When I left, he handed me a thank you card with a raccoon on the front. I keep it in my locker as a reminder that in this job, nothing is too strange to be true. Sometimes it feels like I'm not just a cop but a therapist, a mediator, and occasionally an exorcist for suburban oddities. And honestly, I wouldn't trade it for anything. Not all strange calls come from quirky characters or peculiar situations. Sometimes the ordinary can spiral into the ridiculous faster than you'd think. It was a quiet Tuesday night when the call came through. A noise complaint from a suburban neighborhood. Kids being rowdy, maybe a party. I rolled my eyes a bit. These calls were usually pretty straightforward. I'd show up, ask them to keep it down, and that would be it. When I arrived, though, the street was completely silent. No loud music, no laughter, just the hum of streetlights. I double-checked the address and approached the house. The front door was open, just a crack. I knocked, calling out, "Police! Is everything all right?" A woman in her 40s peeked out, looking exhausted. "Oh, thank God you're here. I can't take it anymore." "What's going on, ma'am?" It's my ex-husband," she said, rubbing her temples. "He's in the backyard." I followed her through the house, my hand resting on my radio just in case. As soon as we stepped outside, I saw it, and I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. In the middle of the lawn stood a massive inflatable Santa Claus at least 10 feet tall. The jolly old man's face was lit up with a slightly sinister glow, his hand waving slowly back and forth. And behind it, tethered to the fence, were half a dozen more inflatables. Reindeer, elves, even an inflatable snow globe with fake snow swirling inside. "Ma'am, I'm not sure I understand." She pointed a shaking finger. "He put them there. My ex. He knows I hate those things. He set them up while I was at work. They're motion activated, so every time a cat walks by, they start singing." Sure enough, as if on cue, the inflatable Santa began to belt out a distorted version of Jingle Bells. She let out a sob. "They've been going off all night." I called him, and he said I could either take them down myself or enjoy the concert. I felt for her, I really did. But technically, no laws were being broken. The inflatables were on her property now, and if she wanted them gone, she'd have to do it herself. I offered to help, and for the next half hour, we wrestled with nylon fabric and tangled extension cords. Santa put up a good fight. His waving hand caught me in the face at least twice, but eventually we got them all deflated and piled up by the curb. When we were done, she hugged me. "Thank you." I thought I was going to lose my mind. As I walked back to my car, I couldn't help but chuckle. I dealt with drunks, thieves, and the occasional raccoon army, but battling a Christmas-themed invasion was a first. Every shift as a cop is different. One minute you're breaking up a fight, the next you're counseling a heartbroken raccoon enthusiast. You never know what's waiting for you when you pick up the radio. But at the end of the day, even when I'm knee-deep in inflatable Santas or talking down a wannabe time traveler, I know I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. And I wouldn't trade it for the world.